Good early afternoon and welcome. We are live. I'm Andy Andrews. You joined the Blue Plate Special here in Orange Beach, Alabama at the Wharf, home of the famous escalator statues. Be sure to get your picture taken when you're down on vacation. Hey, if you're new to us and you are on Facebook, assuming Facebook hadn't blocked you or something, click the notification button and turn the notifications on your phone. That way you'll be notified when we go live here on Facebook. And please share if you can. Thank you, Mark. Headed to Hawaii. Can you believe if he's lucky or not? After my travels this weekend, I mean, wearing the mask in the airport, on the plane, in the next airport, on the next 6-hour flight, and then in 2-hour lines in the airport to get out of the airport. Whew, I think you can have Hawaii, Mark. So, and that's, I'm vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. I'm vaccinated, and I had the, I had to take a COVID test, and it was negative, and then I had to take one to get back. I think they're to Jeff Allen yesterday, and Jeff said, yeah, man, I think that they're just trying to get us all so worked up that we'll just say, yeah, just stick a chip in my neck and let me live my life. So it's pretty rational to me now. He said, we're just going to get all so worked up, we're going to let them do whatever they want to do. Mr. Prater, hello from Munford, Tennessee. Cat Hooker, howdy hey. Marcy Crosser Taylor, are you hot? Here in Eastern Washington, it's 118. It's never been this hot. That is wonderful. Is that wonderful? 118. Oh my gosh. Jules DeWitt says it's supposed to be 110 in Spokane Valley. That just gets me, because people, you go to Arizona. I was in Arizona one time. No, it was Las Vegas, and it was 116. And people go, oh, it's a dry heat. It's a dry heat. Yeah, so is my oven. 120 is 120. Good grief. Heather Olson, hey, how's your sweet family? I hope they're doing great. Horace Maybass from Gibsonville, North Carolina. Hi to everybody on YouTube. And if you are on YouTube, please click that subscribe button. Chris Comer, hey buddy. And you like the shirt? This is, as you know, from Sand Dollar Lifestyles. Right down here, Sand Dollar Lifestyles, the cornerstone of the Wharf. And they have millions of shirts, just millions. When you go in there, tell them I said hello, because they've got so many people working there, and it's so big. You could fit Orange Beach inside that store. It's that big. Walt Hollis from Louisiana. Fort Morgan next on your agenda. Headed to Fort Morgan? Awesome. Next week on vacation. Great fishing there. Andrea Kinney, hi from Nashville. Only 90 degrees there? Yeah, only 90. Well, we're into that kind of heat down here, too. Irene Robinson, hey, how are you? And, we're just like, we're burning up. But it's only like 95 or something, really. But it's a wet 95. It's a wet heat. So Rob Mitchell says, time for a Fresca. Remember Fresca? I used to love Fresca in the glass bottles. Jan Ritter, it's 106 in Newark. 106 in Newark would be like 150 here. You know, that's just crazy. Pat Davis Jones from South Mississippi. Love your big seat. When somebody's from South Mississippi, when somebody says they're from South Mississippi, that means they live in a town that they are sure you won't recognize. We're from South Mississippi. Mississippi is a great state. You know, it's the only state in America that my wife is from. It's also, Mississippi is the only state in America that red shirts Miss Americas. Kim Petrucci, hey, it's nice here today. Well, how hot is it? You know, I mean, it seems so hot everywhere else. Grace Alma Munoz from Houston. Lots of rain yesterday. Love Fresca. Still drink it. Awesome. All right, well, who else? Barbara Benjamin, Noah and the Ark coming to Michigan. You're floating there? Golly. It rained so much a couple of weeks ago when we had that tropical storm. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. I mean, we had fish in the yard. So, all right. Well, anybody from anywhere else interesting? Anybody? And I guess we're going to get to the... Wait, what?
Said anybody from... I was like, where did our Australian guy go?
Oh, you got somebody?
We did.
It's Oklahoma, Louisiana, Fresca,
I can't find it now. It's gone.
St. Augustine. Well, we had somebody on there from Australia. They must have left. But anyway, what time is it in Australia? Australia's the day ahead of us, aren't they? We need to call them and ask them how the rest of the day is going to go. You know, because since they've already experienced the day, ask them how the rest of our day is going to go. What are you laughing at, Lil M? Out there, Lil M laughing, shaking her head.
It's about 3:30 a.m. on the eastern part.
3:30 a.m.? What are they doing up? Oh my gosh.
3:30.
Australia is a beautiful country, but there are many things there that can kill you. I mean, there's just many animals there that can kill. Do you know, I was in Australia one time, and Polly and I were there twice for like 3 weeks each time. And we were walking down the street in Melbourne, and I just happened to notice that a lot of cars had bull bumpers on them. You know what I'm talking about? Those big old pipe, you know, like police cars have, and but they were on cars. They were just like regular cars. They weren't just on people's trucks. They were on cars. I mean, a lot of. And I asked the guy that was with us. I said, "Why do so many cars have those big bumpers on the outside of the car?" He said, man, they hit the kangaroos." And I said, "That's because you hit kangaroos?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I mean, because I'm thinking, okay, you know, we live in the second most populated state with deer in America. And Alabama is the highest populated state per acre, even more than Texas. And so I have friends who've hit deer, and I've never hit a deer. But I mean, because I'm thinking, okay, you know, what was that?
It was you.
Oh, Well, but I'm thinking, I've had friends hit deer, and so when he says, yeah, it's because of kangaroos, I'm thinking, really, that seems like an overreaction. I asked him, I said, have you ever hit a kangaroo? He said, well, yeah, all the time. I said, all the time? How many have you hit? He said, hundreds. Like, are you serious? Yeah. And I mean, you're talking about a continent that has the landmass of the continental United States, and yet they have the population of California. And so it's just like, evidently, there's just kangaroos just everywhere. And I mean, that is just, it's amazing to me. But then we went to New Zealand. And you know how you can tell the difference in somebody from New Zealand and somebody from Australia? Australians talk like this, and they just, it's just a natural conversation with that cool accent. But New Zealanders, they call them Kiwis, New Zealanders seem to ask a question with every statement they make. Everything they say is like this. We're going down to the store. Would you like to go with us? I just had something to eat. It was gorgeous. Everything is on the up. But New Zealand is beautiful. And Mickey Snyder says, no snakes. So, let's get to the 5 things that you didn't know about the Civil War. Now, I'll just tell you. I'm going to tell you where this information comes from, because I just listened to a lecture by a college professor named Gary Gallagher, and it was 27 hours, and so there was, I mean, he covered it like I have never heard it covered. And it's very, very interesting, and it was also very enlightening to me, because there was some context in there that I had never figured. So I figure over the next few weeks we'll bring you some of that in a little bit and let you know some of what Professor Gallagher says. And so one of the things I thought was very curious was about Stonewall Jackson. So we're going to give you some things from the South, some things from the North. Stonewall Jackson was a Confederate general, and he got the name because in a fight there was a fellow officer that looked across the field, and he said, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall." Okay, now you could take that 2 ways, right? I mean, you could say, well, he was unmovable in a fight, and he was, he couldn't be penetrated. He was, he held the ground. Or you could say, well, he is, he's not very agile, and he's like frozen, and he's not moving. But the guy who said it died pretty quickly after he said it, and so while the nickname stuck, nobody really knows whether that was a compliment or a cut. But he did have real strong characteristics as an officer. He was aggressive, had a willingness to take risks, and a sense that you had to, his idea was you had to inflict the greatest possible damage on your enemy. Just hit them and hit them and hit them, and don't give them a chance to get up. And he believed that war was a hard thing, and that if he was at war, that's how he was going to conduct it. So early in the war, Stonewall Jackson was in his late 30s. And so he's about to, early in the war, he's about to embark on a campaign that's going to make him the most famous Confederate military leader for a time until Lee really gets involved. But he began, his first campaign was May 8th at the Little Battle of McDowell. It was just west of Staunton, Virginia, where he pushed back the advanced guard of John C. Fremont's army. Okay, now there's a couple of things to say there. One is, Staunton, Virginia is where the Statler brothers are from. Little M, Statler brothers, Staunton, Virginia. And what was the name of the battle? What was that? Back it up. It was on May 8th at the Little Battle of McDowell. Now, I gotta say, whoever named it the Little Battle of McDowell was not in the fight. I mean, they just weren't in the fight. Because to me, if somebody's shooting at you, you're not going to say, you know, darn it, this is a little battle. If there's cannons going off and somebody's shooting at me, this is a big battle. This is a big battle. But he pushed back that advance guard of Fremont's army. Now, here is what I wanted to really get to. Stonewall Jackson is one of the most bizarre characters from the Civil War. He was just this bag of oddities. He was, is in his 30s. He's a hypochondriac. He had all kinds of worries about his health. And in a battle, he would often hold his right hand up into the air. Now, he was extremely religious, but he didn't hold his hand up because he was praying, as some of his men figured, but because he thought he didn't have an equilibrium of blood in his body. And if he held his right hand up, then the blood would flow down and reestablish equilibrium.
Pretty weird.
Yeah. He also would not eat pepper because he thought it weakened his left leg. Not his right leg, just his left. Now, if he accidentally did eat pepper, he would not let his back touch the back of a chair because he said it jumbled his organs. And it was important to sit upright so that your organs were naturally on top of one another. Very eccentric guy, this Stonewall Jackson. Okay, here's the second thing. Oh, and by the way, let me just insert here that Jimmy Yeary, a friend of our show, Jimmy Yeary, this week, Jimmy Yeary's song, Bone Dry, is the #1 country bluegrass song in America. How about that? So, congratulations to Jimmy and Sonia and the kids, the whole family. The song is awesome, by the way. I mean, just, you can get it. It's available now. Bone Dry. Jimmy wrote it and is singing it. And it's bluegrass, and it is awesome. All right? So, anyway. All right. So, here's the second thing that you didn't know about the Civil War. Now, this is in the North, what we're talking about here. We just talked about the South. This is in the North. There was a draft. It was called conscription. And in the North, there was one in July of 1963, and then 3 in 1864. The War Department assigned a target number of men to each congressional district, and then 50 days to supply the number of men to meet the quota before anybody would actually be drafted. So the states, and the congressional districts went in, they worked hard to meet their quotas because they wanted to keep their populations happy, and they didn't want actual drafting implemented, so they worked to meet their quotas. They used bounties mainly to meet their quotas, and this became a real problem. Listen to this. There was often a federal bounty, a state bounty, there might be a local bounty, and sometimes these bounties would amount to several $100s. Bounty brokers went into business to find volunteers for the areas that were short of their quotas. Now, the man for your quota didn't actually have to come from your area. They just had to be credited to your area. So if you're in a county in Pennsylvania and you're not meeting your quota, you could get men from Ohio to sign up, and that would count against your quota, as long as they're coming through your category, right? So bounty brokers would go out to find these men. Rich districts would outbid poorer districts because they offered bigger bounties and they got more men. There was a group called bounty jumpers that came into existence, and these were men who would enlist and take the bounty, then they would desert, and they would go enlist somewhere else and take the bounty there and desert again. One guy did this 32 times before he was finally put in prison. The bounties eventually reached as high as $1,000, and the North paid out more than $500 million in money, inducing men to join. All right, so here's number 3, things you didn't know about the Civil War. It's in the South. About 5% of the money to fight the war came from taxes. Only 5%. A second way to raise money was by floating bond issues. Bonds would get money into the Treasury, and that way it was more palatable to the citizenry because you didn't have to buy bonds. It was an option on your part. And the Confederacy sold a good number of bonds. In the end, they sold enough to pay for about 30% of the war. And if you remember in the movie Gone with the Wind, these were the kind of bonds that showed up in that movie. Remember where Gerald O'Hara would come home and pull all his bonds out of his desk, and he's invested money in the future of the Confederacy. So that's what people were doing. They were counting on the Confederacy to succeed, and they're showing their belief in the ability of the South to win by investing their money in this war effort. That was not a good investment. So there's taxation, there's bonds, and the third way the Confederacy got money to fight the war was to print it. They just printed treasury notes or paper money, and paper money brought in the remaining 60 or 65% of the funds that the Confederacy needed. This was a disaster, okay? Inflation soared as the government printed more. I mean, it's like, we're out of money again, print more. I don't even know how anybody is that.
It can never work.
Yeah, this can't ever work. And so just print more. So at the same time, goods became scarcer because the Union blockade became more effective, and because Union armies were penetrating deeper and deeper into the Confederacy. Print more money. But this printing of the money, this caused greater and greater dislocation from reality. because not only of the Confederate economy, but of the transportation network that could deliver goods from one part of the Confederacy to another. So you had these two factors working at the same time in this deadly combination, an overabundance of paper money and a shortage of goods. The result was like awful inflation. Inflation soared just like crazy all across the Confederacy. Get this, by 1864, it took $46 to buy what $1 had bought in 1861. And by the end of the war, in 1865, the ratio was $92 to buy what $1 had bought at the beginning of the war. That's just hyperinflation. This is like in, was it Venezuela? You know, a few years ago. I mean, people were getting all their cash out of the bank, and yeah, I mean, they had enough cash to put in a wheelchair. A wheelbarrow. Had enough cash to put in a wheelbarrow. They'd be going down the street, and somebody would mug them and dump the paper out and take the wheelbarrow. I mean, the paper's not worth anything. Okay, so here's number 4. In the North, back to the North, the 13th Amendment became the key piece of legislation that was enacted during the war. On April 8th, 1864, the Senate passed an amendment to abolish slavery in the United States. Now, this is after the Emancipation Proclamation. We'll talk about that at another time. But they passed an amendment, the Senate did, to abolish slavery, but they were not able to get it through the House of Representatives. It came to a vote in June of 1864, and it was voted down by the Democrats. Lincoln, you remember, was a Republican. Okay, so now the 13th Amendment, ending slavery, was to become the first of 3 great Civil War amendments to the Constitution, the 13th, 14th, and the 15th. The 14th guaranteed equal protection under the law, and the 15th gave the black man the right to vote. The elections of November 1864 brought huge Lincoln supporters, huge Republican majorities in both houses of Congress, and it changed the political atmosphere. So Lincoln decided to throw the full weight of his administration behind an effort to lobby with the Democrats and others in Congress, and because remember, they had to have a 2/3 majority to amend the Constitution. So in January 1865, Lincoln and his allies worked hard. Now, remember, you got to have a 2/3 majority for a constitutional amendment. So to the last minute, the issue was in doubt. But the final vote came on January 31st, 1865, and it was 119 to 56 in favor of passage. So the supporters had their 2/3 margin, and the 13th Amendment had passed Congress. Now, they still got the 14th, equal protection under the law, and the 15th, which gave the vote to the black man. Now, not the black woman or the white woman. To me, one of the weirdest scenes, if you've ever seen the movie Lincoln that Spielberg did, Daniel Day-Lewis played Lincoln, and man, he was, 30 seconds after that movie started, you're watching Lincoln. I mean, he was incredible. But that whole movie, so they're moving on through this, and And he's pushing now. They passed the 13th and the 14th. Now he's going for the 15th. And so there's this a Democratic congressman that stands up in the House, and I just thought this was hilarious. I mean, just thinking like we think today, but he stands up in front of the House and he says, "Come on now, we can't, we can't. If we pass this amendment, the black man will be able to vote." And you hear people going, he says, "And if the black man gets to vote, the next thing you know, the women will want to vote." And they go, "Oh!" I mean, it's like, oh, not that. But golly, I have a hard time imagining those times. But okay, one more. You ready? Now, I said something about the women. This is about the women. And this is in the North, okay? There's not as many records as we would like in the South about this, but in the North, there became secretarial and clerk type positions for women during the war. These were positions that had been almost exclusively reserved for men before the war. By the way, nursing was a man's profession before the war. That was almost exclusively reserved for men. But stores began to have a few female sales clerks, although not very many of them. And all of these positions in nursing and clerking were largely held by women of the upper middle class. Okay, these were not working class, poor women who were holding these kind of jobs. These were women from the solid middle class. And so for historians, the picture is much murkier, as it almost always is with poor people in American history, because they didn't leave as much written records as wealthier, more literate people. And therefore, it's often difficult for historians to reconstruct their lives and experiences than it is to reconstruct the lives and experiences of those of wealthier people. We do know that while agriculture boomed during the war, industrial workers in the North experienced a decline in the standard of living, with inflation outpacing the gains in wages. Now, for you people who sew, or you grew up watching your mama sew, I want you to think about this. This is for instance, for the wage scale. Seamstresses, when the war started in 1861, seamstresses could get 17.5 cents for a shirt. 17.5 cents or so in a shirt. And by yeah, half a cent. I don't know. I guess you had to do 2 shirts, So, but by 1864, they could only get 8 cents for a shirt. It's more than a 50% drop in what a woman would get to make a shirt. And at the same time that's happening, remember, inflation is taking place as well. Okay, so when men of the laboring classes or small farmers died in the war, their widows had very little recourse for assistance. No insurance, there are very few relief programs, and the number of women arrested increased drastically during the war. And it was sometimes because they preferred to go to prison instead of becoming a prostitute. again, we don't really know very much about how the lower class, the poor people, the really poor people lived then, but they were often made poorer by the loss of a husband in the army, and we don't really know much about how they actually fared or made ends meet. It was a brutal experience for a poor person trying to cope with all that the war was bringing. And it's important to remember that many of the generalizations you'll hear or read about women during the Civil War, many of the examples of what happened to women during the war and how there were new opportunities for women during the war and how their lives were expanded or enlarged during the war, these examples applied only to women of the middle class or higher and did not really apply to the enormous number of poor women. There are tens of thousands of letters that are available in museums and universities, tens of thousands of letters from women who are back home, and this is North and South, that just tens of thousands of letters from women who are back home with the children, and they're writing to their husbands and saying, come home. If you want to see us alive, come home. And because they're starving. And they were, they couldn't pull it off. And so there was a huge number of desertions. And there were a ton of people who would desert, come home, get the crops in, and then go back to the army. But of course, record keeping being what it was, then there were a lot of families that the dad just disappeared. It was just, it's hard to actually imagine this today, but we'll talk about it again some more. But it's in fact, I'll come up with some statistics for you in a week or so. But some of the numbers are just they're just stunning, and I'm not even talking about the casualties, but the I've studied a lot about the Battle of Gettysburg, and Gettysburg had 50,000 casualties in 4 days. That's more than in the entire Vietnam War. And that's just one battle. And so it's a rich subject that is so sad. And she's right. And Tammy, you live in the Shenandoah Valley, which that was such a critical area because that was like where most of the food came from for the South. And when that was taken, it was kind of over. But anyway, just amazing stuff. Maury Davis, hey buddy, from Nashville, Tennessee. It's good to see you. Your name. I can't see you, but I see your name. So we will be back Thursday with more fun stuff. Hopefully it won't be just sad or weird, but we will be with you on Thursday. We're going to have a great time, and we appreciate you joining us. And remember, you can share this to your page even now, and the whole show will be there. So take care. Bye-bye.